Mr. Pickle, I want to talk about the Uyghur Forced Labor Act, and several companies have been listed to it. Most recently, Homeland Security listed 26 textile companies. Do you think that this act has been effective in changing companies' behavior, whether it be U.S. companies importing products from China or Chinese companies exporting to the United States?
Thanks for the question, Senator. I would say from my time in government and my time in the private sector, I have seen a level of attention to the issue of forced labor that I did not experience before the UFLPA was enacted into law. Are there still issues that need to be ironed out in terms of how industry and government are working together to fully implement every provision of the UFLPA? Absolutely. I think there's a lot of work that can be done in terms of understanding how certain technologies can be used and how due diligence standards can be clarified to make sure that we have the best shot at making sure that we're keeping forced labor out of the country. I do think the UFLPA, the provisions that envision getting at the root causes of forced labor, the diplomatic engagement, as well as using our trade negotiating and trade engagements to actually address those conditions, is a far more sustainable approach than relying almost entirely on border enforcement, which should be more of a backstop and less of a single point of failure.
Do you think it works effectively from third countries, transitioning from China to
Sure.
other countries to come to the United States? Is that a problem?
Sure, transshipment. So transshipment is potentially an issue in all forms of trade law compliance. Forced labor is no exception to that. Forced labor is challenging because in many instances, Customs and Border Protection has to evaluate many tiers back in the supply chain where if they're looking at counterfeits or they're looking at some other type of violation, they're looking at the goods as they're presented to them, as they exist right in front of them, right? So it's a different dynamic. They're having to go farther back in the process. Transshipment is not necessarily always an illicit practice, but to the extent that it's used to mask where products are coming from, it can present a challenge. Ultimately, CBP needs to have better visibility into the risks that exist around the world, something that other agencies should be contributing more to, in my view, so that CBP can share that information with their trusted trade partners.
Thank you. Mr. Drake, since the enactment of the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act, there's been discussion about the effective level of de minimis threshold. I supported the passage of that act, and I still consider myself a free trader. However, I believe that continuous abuses of this threshold must be addressed. Do you think that there's a more effective level of Congress could set in de minimis threshold in order to prevent abuses such as bulk importation of counterfeits?
So we have found that the $800 level has been very successful, and it has allowed CBP to target its limited enforcement resources to where it is best appropriate. That being said, we recognize that the trade environment has changed significantly over the last 25 years. There are concerns out there that CBP is not collecting certain types of data that would help further refine its enforcement mission. But we would argue that is true for not just de minimis shipments, but all up and down the trade environment. So if a formal entry and informal entry, et cetera. We have been supportive of CBP looking to expand the data it's collecting from new parties in the customs space, like warehouses, fulfillment centers, et cetera. But we think that more can be done. And we do think that efforts to single out de minimis are inappropriate. And I think that we would say that a comprehensive review of the data that CBP is collecting at all levels of trade are a more appropriate focus for Congress's attention.